How are you? It's coming along. I stood a little bit. I had PT this morning and then gave a tour at the Jason Russell House for folks from the Coalition for CPA. It's a statewide volunteer organization. And Clarissa Rowe, who's the chair of the local CPA committee, called yesterday and asked if we could give them a tour. And it was primarily focused on what have we done with CPA money.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, but
Did you make it upstairs or did you go upstairs?
no, I didn't go upstairs.
Oh.
I could, but you know.
Yeah.
I,
Hey,
I
don't push it.
no, I stood around too long, and that's a little discomfort this afternoon.
Are you supposed to be walking? I mean,
I'm
that's
supposed to be walking. I'm supposed to be on a stationary bike.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
So moving is good.
Yeah, moving is good.
Standing and too much sitting isn't good either?
They tell you to keep moving, basically. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, they say that in general.
Yes, they do. Yeah, yeah,
Everything. Well, it's good. Good to see you up.
yeah. It's
And out.
great to be up and out. Yeah,
Good, that's great. Thank you very much for doing that tonight.
no problem. Thank you for suggesting it.
The front row is reserved for anybody?
Not to my knowledge. You could ask Sarah. She would know.
Sound system, by the way?
I'm sorry?
Sound system, where is it?
I don't
You know
know.
where the speakers are?
No, I do not know. Alan probably knows. Sure he knows. Yeah.
Well, I'm looking forward to this.
Yes.
immensely.
Yes. Me too.
How are you?
Good evening. We'll get the evening started. My name is George Parsons. I'm the president of the Arlington Historical Society, and this is the first time since I was elected in May of 2020 that I've actually get to see some of the members due to the pandemic. So it's great to be here. There is a lot happening at the Jason Russell House, in case you haven't noticed. Probably the most recognizable thing that's going on is the activities concerned with our geothermal climate control system. There was a large truck out there drilling 4 wells that went down 400 feet. And what they're going to enable us to do is to heat and cool the Jason Russell House and keep it at a constant 68 to 74 degrees year round. And that will preserve the house even better than it has been so far. In addition to the geothermal project, Chuck and Patsy and an army of volunteers are doing a wonderful job refurbishing the Smith Museum. We're able to do that in part because we got a $75,000 earmark, some call it pork, from the state to do that kind of work. Sarah Lundberg, who's our director, has also been incredibly successful in getting other grants. A group of volunteers are now working on putting rolling shelves into a space downstairs that will allow us to use that space more effectively. Sarah has gotten a number of other grants as well, and I'd like you to join me in giving her a hand of applause. Lastly, I'd like to conclude before I turn the meeting over to Patsy. The annual appeal letters went out recently, and you're probably wondering, why do we need more money since we're getting grants left, right, and center, either from the state or from the town or from IMLS? The reason is all of those grants go to capital improvements, things like fixing the house, fixing the museum. None of them can be used to do things like pay Sarah's salary, keep the lights on, keep the oil heat in the Smith Museum on. So that's why we're asking, and with all the activities going on, I'm going to ask you to dig deep this year and exceed our record take last year in the annual appeal. So with that, Patsy, I'll turn it, oh, wait a minute. The reason I'm up here actually is that Elaine asked me to give a pitch for additional tour guides. And knowing my obviously failing memory, she gave me a script, which is very useful. The Historical Society is hoping to return to indoor tours in 2022 in the Jason Russell House, which we all know is a colonial era farmhouse where the most action took place on April 19th, 1775. We look forward to enjoying an air-conditioned house due to the geothermal project. There's a new exhibit that Sarah put together last summer that we never got to show you. It's Monotony, Road to Revolution. And you're going to hear about more recently discovered bullet holes tonight. And we will be able to show those at the house. The tour guide committee is seeking volunteers to lead tours of the house on weekends in 2022. Preparation, you don't have to be an expert at this point because there'll be a training session, printed materials, and mentoring with experienced guides. Time commitment is about 1 day a month, partnered with another guide. You're not going to be on your own. And if you're interested, please see Elaine. Elaine, can you hold your hand up or take yourself down? Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patsy.
Does this pick me up okay? Okay. How's that? Better? Okay. I too want to, along with George, welcome you back to our lecture series. It's been a long time since we've had people here, and I'm thrilled to see all of you. And welcome to those of you who are on YouTube. So, hello, hello. I do want to say that I'm particularly grateful to those of you who are in the audience who have felt comfortable to come to a lecture in person. I feel very strongly that when somebody has put together a program and is in speaking, you need an audience. You need an audience to react off of, to see what their reaction is to you, and certainly to get a great round of applause at the end. So I'm very, very happy to see those of you that came out tonight. So As you know, I always do a programmatic theme to kind of organize the lecture series for a given year. When we last left off, the theme that we were doing was called My Story, and it was the story of different people, places, or things related to historical Arlington. So we didn't do a lot of those programs because of the pandemic. So the theme for this year is My Story Redux. And so it's a redo of, or a doing of several of the programs that we had to cancel before. We were planning to start in October with a review of all of the redoing that we've been doing at the Jason Russell House and the Smith Museum, as George just mentioned. And that happened to be on the night that we were predicting a major nor'easter. And so at the last minute, we did cancel the program. And we're planning to add that program on to our January program, which is on samplers that we have at the Society. Tonight, we're doing bullet holes, which is something, again, that's part of what this house is all about, a very exciting part. And then come February, we're doing a program that we had originally planned on the archaeology in the Plymouth colony. In March, George Wellington, who is the founder of the Historical Society, is going to make an appearance. In April, we're going to be doing a story of this organ that's right over here in the corner. It's a pipe organ. And lo and behold, the person who's doing the program, Jonathan Ambrosina, is a national expert on organs and on that very organ. That brand of organs. And it was amazing that I discovered that he lived in Arlington and was very willing to do a program for us. And along with that, one of our select board members, Eric Helmuth, who is quite an organist and is part of what he does for work, is going to be playing the organ for us. And then in May, tried and true Richard Duffy will be doing a program for us to end this year. So thank you all again for being here. So for tonight's program, we are thrilled to have Joel Bowie. And those of you that are members certainly were able to have access to a tremendous write-up that Sarah did on Joel's background, which is unbelievable. But he has an enduring passion for the material culture related to military history. Growing up in Concord, he began collecting at an early age and developed a passion for arm, equipage, and uniforms of the common soldier from the American Revolutionary War through World War II. He is an active member of the American Society of Arms Collectors and an instructor for advanced metal detecting for the archaeologist. He is current director of historic arms and militaria at Brunei and Company Auctioneers, and you might recognize him since he also appears on Antiques Roadshow and is the expert that they have there on arms and weapons. So Joel, we're thrilled to have you here.
So after that, I don't have to say anything else, right? So I want to thank everybody for coming. There are some people who traveled some miles to be here, and I appreciate that. I told you didn't have to come. Don't fall asleep or I'll kill you. So I'm going to talk about bullet strikes from April 19th, 1775. And it's not just about the Jason Russell House. That's a big part of it. But we got to doing the bullet strike study through other things also. Started with doing some archaeology, experimental archaeology. So I'm kind of going to run through that stuff first, and then we'll get to the Jason Russell House, and then I'm going to go through other extant bullet strikes from April 19th. So I started working on the Parker's Revenge Archaeology Project. Some of you guys may have heard of it, around 2013. And we spent a few years out in the field on the battle road. And we actually found the spot where that incident took place. We found the musket balls from both sides. And during that project, I was working with a gentleman named Dr. Douglas Scott, who was famous for working at the Little Bighorn battlefield over the years and many other battlefields. And he was a forensic archaeologist. And we were talking one day, and he said, you know, I'd really like to do a live fire study of muskets from the Revolution, but where are we going to get the guns? I had the answer. At my house. So I had all these custom-built guns. I own others, but I had all these guns built because I wanted to be able to shoot them, but I liked the artistry of the arms. You know, not just there, yeah, you can kill somebody, and many people were killed with these guns, but when I look at some of these, I look at the way they were made, the engineering, and it's fascinating to me. So I had these guns custom built, and when Doug said that, I thought, what a better way to use them than to take them out and use them for scientific study. So then we loaded up the car and we drove an hour south of Atlanta, Georgia, and we set up on a 350-acre property. And we hired a ballistologist to come with high-speed cameras, Doppler radar, and we spent 4 days shooting, which was a heck of a lot of fun. And so we were able to record enough data that we could publish a report. And we did this all, we self-funded this. We did this all so that archaeologists could take that information, or historic sites, or arms collectors, and understand the guns in a better way. And we learned a heck of a lot. This is a lock shot just to kind of go over the firearms. Many of you know how they function, but obviously the flint hits the hammer, the sparks go into the pan, and you get a big puff of smoke. And it takes a second in slow motion, but then you'll see the charge go off. You can see the kick of the gun. You know, you kind of have to imagine this stuff going off all around the Jason Russell house and many of the other houses on the battle road, and inside the house, you know, how loud it was, and how smoky it was. And here you can see the gun's about to go off. That was still just the powder in the pan. And there it goes. You can see the flame shoot out. So there's a lot of force there. On the other end, we decided we would set up ballistics gel, and we put pieces of cloth on the end of the gel. You can just see the line there. And you'll see the ball come out. It hits the cloth. It goes into the ballistics gel, and as it gets to the second block, you'll start to see that it carried pieces of the cloth with it. So you can see how this wasn't part of our study, but all of a sudden it's like, well, that's where you get sepsis, disease, through the pieces of cloth that go in the body. But I chose this particular video because of what the ball does at the end of the ballistics gel, because we never would have noticed this if we didn't have high-speed cameras going. Starts to go out of the gel, and then it decides it doesn't want to leave. And it gets sucked 3 inches back into the gel. Now, that's something we never would have seen if we didn't have these cameras. And look at the cavitation also. You can imagine how that musket ball affected the body and your internal organs. Just horrible. And here, one of the things we wanted to find out too, there had been musket balls found at Monmouth near a hospital site that had a cloth imprint on one side of the ball. The other side of the ball had stippling from powder burn, which meant that the side where the powder burn was did not have a cloth patch on it. It was fired in a paper cartridge and it hit a piece of cloth. So that the musket balls, like this one, picked up the weave of the cloth. And we had been working at Gettysburg on Little Round Top on an archaeology project on another temporary grave site. And we found 2 mini balls with a twill woven cloth imprint on it. So we were able to figure out that the musket ball will pick up the weave of the cloth. In this case, it was plain weave, common broadcloth. But when I put superfine broadcloth up, it picked up the finer weave. It was amazing. So with all these other projects going on, archaeology projects, shooting and everything, a friend of mine, Chris Fox, and I went for a visit with Sarah. And you know, I wanted to take Chris and show him the house, but also a lot of the objects that were in the house, because Arlington Historical has a great collection of great objects related to the 19th and other things. But we wanted to go through some of the April 19th stuff. And as we were walking around, thinking about the bullets, the ballistic study, the live fire, we're like, wait a minute, the ball went through here, it had to go over here. And sure enough, we started finding more hits from musket balls. We started to go through the whole house. So that led to us thinking about, you know, I called Dr. Doug Scott, said, hey, you know, the 3 of us, let's put together a project. So what were the goals going to be? What was the point of doing this? Is it just for ourselves? And, you know, we had to come up with what was the reason behind it? Because again, this is all going to be done for free. This is going to cost a lot of money and time. And so, you know, the goals obviously are to share it with other historians, archaeologists, and also the Jason Russell House in Lexington and other sites, so they can understand their bullet strikes and explain them in a better way. Methodology, you know, a lot of these, the shooting incident reconstruction was Doug's thing. I had never done that before, so it was fascinating to watch him work. Study of arms used, obviously, I had done a lot of that. And archival archaeology, research, and primary documentation. George does a lot of that. It's fun stuff. But there's a lot of great things in the documentation. This one, Reverend William Gordon, is to me, he talks about a lot of the damage and destruction once Percy arrived in East Lexington and before they turned around and marched back to Boston. But he mentions in there that when Percy arrived with the cannon, the scene changed. And it did change in a major way because Smith's force that was in Concord was coming back, and they were pretty much decimated at this point when Percy arrived. Percy arrived with 2 cannon and 1,000 men approximately, all with full cartridge boxes. So they had ammunition and they were angry. They were not happy with what had been going on. Both sides weren't. And it really started to come to a head. If it hadn't earlier in the day, it really did at this point. They were burning things, smashing things up, taking things. And obviously, if you're one of those British soldiers, you can understand why. If you're being shot at from some of those buildings, you're going to shoot at the windows, you're going to burn the place, you're going to do whatever you can to protect yourself because they needed to get back to Boston. This next account is from an unidentified British officer from the 4th Regiment of Foot, written April 22nd. And he mentions exactly what we see in the Jason Russell House. Soldiers firing front and rear, and then the main body along the road pelting at the windows. And you read this in so many accounts, and he pretty much describes exactly what we're seeing in the house. Another great thing about this letter is he was in the Jason Russell House, this British officer. And if you read the bottom of it, he talks about, he counted the 11 dead. He obviously didn't see a few of the others that were around. But he mentioned one guy he found with 73 balls in his pouch and 2 horns of powder. I mean, that guy was loaded for bear. And another one, a great one, is Amos Farmsworth. He was from Groton, and when their company received the alarm and they marched, they weren't there for the fight, but they followed up right behind the action that had gone on. And so he witnessed what had happened in East Lexington. And the last sentence is interesting. He went into a house where blood was half over shoes. That may be where the quote comes from, the 19th century, that the house was ankle deep in blood. Now, was he exaggerating a little bit? Probably. But it must have been a gruesome sight to see all those bodies laid out and the blood all over the floor. And obviously the British soldiers weren't in there. There were bodies all over the road. So you can understand with him seeing that why he would have used that quote. So the next thing was we were going to a conference, Society for Historical Archaeology conference, which happened to be in Boston in 2020. And we were all presenting papers there. And Doug Scott, all these others were going to be in town. So we set up, we finished the conference on a Saturday. We had Sunday off to kind of prepare. And then Monday, we hit the Jason Russell House. But what do you do before a bullet strike study? You got to have a party. And so what we did, though, is we were able to sit down and have everybody meet each other. You know, Sarah didn't know some of these other folks, didn't know Doug Scott, and it was an opportunity for everybody to sit around, go through the accounts, talk about what we were going to do in preparation for the next day. And of course, I got Sarah's husband, John, eating. Sorry about that. So on the morning of the 13th, Monday morning, we hit the Jason Russell House hard, some of us with a little hangover. But we started out, we also invited some Park Service archaeologists from the Northeast region to come. And one of the reasons we did that, we wanted to show them what we were doing. At the same time, some of these archaeologists are top in the business, and they think as they're going through, and they may think of things that we didn't that we might want to do. So we started in the parlor, the lower parlor, downstairs, and here's Doug putting a ballistics rod in the strike in the paneling. That ball, it came from the main body on Mass Ave. We set up lasers off of this stuff, and you could see where each position was. And that one went right out onto Mass Ave, so that was probably come from the main body. It went through the paneling, went through the plaster on the other side, and hit the newel post at the bottom of the stairs, and it skipped out towards the camera from where I took that picture. And that one I love, that newel post. When you walk in there and you see that thing, it's amazing. And here's a little endoscope video. It's a little tilted, but you can see the hole starts off fairly round, and then it gets to be almost football shaped before it exited and hit the post. Obviously, the plaster and lath is 19th or early 20th century, but that's what the hole looks like as it passes from the face of the board to the back. So the parlor chamber upstairs was another shot that came from the main body, and the laser put it right through where that post-it is in the window, and it went right out onto Mass Ave. Luckily, nobody crashed. We didn't hit any drivers in the face. But it came through the window, it hit that panel, but it had to have gone someplace else. And so the secret door behind that panel, Chris and I had tried to get up in there, but we were a little too healthy or fat. Rubenesque. Rubenesque is the word. But Mary Jane Balicki, one of the archaeologist's wives, could get up inside there and she could see. There's her feet dangling out. She was a trooper too. So there's the back side of the hole, and you can see where the shot, like almost all bullet strikes from these muskets, blows the wood right out the back. But where did it hit after that? The back of the staircase riser to the attic. You can see the strike right there. So that's where it ended, and then it dropped down and probably went down through the foundation. We couldn't find the ball. So another shot that was interesting that we found was from about the position where I took this picture. British soldier fired a 69 caliber shot out of a 75 caliber gun, hit the siding right there. It went through the wall, and you can see the laser beam. Sarah's taking a picture of the laser beam there. The laser beam was on top of the ballistics rod on a laser level. So that's why it's a little bit higher than the actual hole. But there's where it came through, and it was filled with plaster after the event, like a lot of these holes were. They had to get back to their normal life. They didn't want holes in the house. They put plaster in it and moved along. But where did it go after that? It hit the top of the panel across the room, went straight up through, came out the other side, and you can see the wood blow out on the back, and it skipped off the ceiling right by the stairs that come up. And here's Doug measuring downstairs. Most of you guys that have been in the Jason Russell house know where this shot is. He's measuring up to what we call number 3, which is interesting because it came through, not the door, but the door jamb, went through the stair riser and into the plaster on the other side of the wall. And I love that bullet holes. I've looked at that since I was a kid. That's almost an object in itself that should be saved at this point. But you can see here, number 3, where it went through the riser with a ballistics rod. And then you can see, everybody's seen this image of number 3 is the top hole, where you can see the wood blowout, went into the plaster. And then number 4 is the lower hole that went through the lower stair riser and into the plaster wall on the other side. And it's hard to see in this image, but you can see the 2 post-its at the bottom, number 3 and number 4, where those balls would have struck into the plaster. So one of the things we did too is we went from cellar to attic. So we went through the entire house, and up in the attic, just below the north side window on the Mass Ave side, we found this bullet strike, and we found another one. So it goes with the accounts where they talk about pelting away at the windows because they didn't want to be shot from those windows. So they're shooting at every window. In the petitions for losses put in on April 19th, there's a lot of broken glass, a lot of damage to the houses from broken glass. So there's my favorite newel post with where bullet skipped off and headed out towards the front door. But there was another shot fired from right behind it on that landing, up the stairs, and it hit the newel post at the top of the stairs right here, and it's filled with plaster. And here's the opposite side. And it never exited completely. If it did, it fell on the ground. It never went through the wall, but that's a pretty thick oak post. It may have been popped out. You can see where the wood was all blown out, ripped out. They may have ripped it out. I checked it with a metal detector. It's just filled in with plaster now. So one of the people we invited to the project from the Park Service was Dr. Meg Waters-Wilkes, who did the Parker's Revenge project. And she had suggested, I could see her as we're going through the house and the gears are turning in her head. And she's like, you need to do a 3D laser scan of the entire house. I'm like, okay, that's great, but I don't have the, we don't have the money for that. Well, it turns out her husband worked for Feldman Geospatial, and they did 2 pro bono projects a year. So I contacted Steve and her husband, and Feldman surveyors decided they would take this as one of their pro bono projects. So they came out, and Sarah and I met them, and they went through the entire house, and they came up with some great scans. This one, you can see the entire house from the parlor all the way up to the attic, and you can see even the replaced boards in the attic with a 3D laser scanning. Just amazing technology, which also allowed us to put this together. So this is the trajectory analysis of the house. The one thing I want to change on it is you can't see where grade is, but you can see the cellar. See the cellar down below? So I'm going to add grade lines to it so you can see outside, but you can see where each shot came from. into the house. Now, there were probably other shots in that house that have been lost for time, covered over, sheathing replaced. We may never find all of them, but it's amazing that there's this many that survive in the house. The other thing that Meg suggested was ground penetrating radar survey of the entire property. So we contacted through Meg again, Dan Walsh, who works for GSSI, he's director of sales of this equipment. And it happens he lives in Arlington. So he had known about the house, he was excited by it, and they gave us pro bono 3D laser scanning with a written report at the end, which was another real generous gesture on their part, but they loved it. They thought it was really fascinating. And Dan himself went in and he brought some new technology with him, and we tried to see if there were anomalies in some of the wall boards through the house with this handheld unit. But here's one of the main questions that we had had. You know, we had heard for years, was the house moved? Was it not moved? Was it just picked up because the chimney was replaced and the furnace put in? We looked at the makeup of the grout on the foundation. We looked at the foundation itself, the ledge. We took the teal drawings and overlaid them with other drawings. We looked at the Sanborn maps, and we kept coming up with that the house may have been picked up, but it wasn't moved across the property. And so one of the things we really wanted to know, and this is why we wanted GSSI to come out, was to do the scan of the ground and tell us. And obviously from on the right here, you can see that they found no evidence that the house had been moved. So that affects the ballistics. So we wanted to make sure, you know, everything was lining up the way it should, but we needed this report. And luckily they just finished it in August. And again, this is all free. This is pro bono work. And these guys, Peter Leach, who wrote this, is one of the best GPR guys in the world. You know, the guy's incredible. They use this equipment, they tweak and play with this equipment and do things that you wouldn't imagine you could do. So I really can't thank those guys enough. So since we finished Jason Russell, now we were like, we're gonna have to do the rest of the known bullet strikes. So we started to go through and we went to Elisha Jones. And as a kid, I was friends with the superintendent's son, John Moffett. So I used to hang out at this house all the time and climb around up in there and look at the bullet hole. I never really thought about it. I thought about it, but not like ballistics, you know, wise and trying to line it up. The shed that sits in the middle there was over to the left on 1775. In the 19th century, it was slid over and attached to the house, and this little carriage house section of it was added on. So the shed would have been over to the left. But supposedly a British soldier fired a shot retreating from the North Bridge, and it hit right here. There's the outside of the shot, and I'm sure a lot of you guys have seen this if you've been up there. And then here's the inside, where it blew the wood out on the back, hit the oak post, shot across and went out the back wall. Now the back wall had been all replaced in the 19th century, so we couldn't see where it exited. But it was pretty cool to see the inside again as an adult, kind of, and I am an adult, Stuart, and see what it looked like and look at the blowout. Another one in Lexington is the Nathan and Merritt Monroe house. Now this is privately owned. And I had heard about a bullet strike in the house, and our friends at Lexington Historical Society actually hooked me up with the owner. I made an appointment and we went in. This is from the Amos Doolittle Plate 1 of Lexington, and you can see the Merritt Monroe house there. And here it is today, well, last winter, but today. And it was shot from the backyard. You can see there's a big addition off the back. That wasn't there, obviously, in 75. And you could see that a shot had gone up through and lodged in the middle rafter in the attic. And here's the rafter, and you can see the round part of the hole, and in the top of it, there's like a little gouge where someone had gouged something out of it. And they had, because Lexington Historical Society had the ball that came out of it. And you can see the gouge mark on the top where someone had pried it out. And there was no information about who had done this, when it was found. Nobody knew anything really, other than it came out of the house and we saw the bullet strike. In going through Mass Archives records, which I do quite a bit, I had compiled all the petitions for losses on April 19th. And this just happens to be the one signed by Merritt Monroe in 1776 for damage and losses to a property on April 19th. But then a newspaper search found this. From 1925, inside the workmen found 2 bullet holes, one on the right front door, which is gone now, and the one in the attic. So they traced the ball, which is basically what we've been doing in all these, and they took it out and it ended up at the Historical Society. One of the funny things about this article is if you look at the last paragraph, Bullet holes have been found in the Buckram Tavern. The guy was thinking about the inner lining in his coat or something. You know, thinking about the wrong place. So at Buckram Tavern, or Buckman, there were more bullet strikes that aren't shown today that we can't see. But there was one fired roughly from around where I was standing when I took this picture, and it hit the front door, and Lexington has the original front door. You can see the ballistics rod down on the lower left. And here's where it came out the back, typical wood blowout. We've measured all these holes with calipers. Most of these holes are coming out as British, around 0.70, 0.71. Some of them are misshapen from hitting 2 pieces of wood. So it's kind of hard to tell, but because there is some loss when they go through wood. But they're all coming up as fired from possibly a British arm. So another newspaper search, I found this, Reverend Caleb Stetson, and it talks about bullet hole and clapboards. And so I went, wait a minute, Lexington Historical Society, we only saw the door, and I emailed them and they said, oh yeah, wait a minute, we have a clapboard with a bullet hole in it. So I went back and looked at that, and again, that one comes out as about 0.71 mostly. It averages out at 0.71. Monroe Tavern, heading back towards Jason Russell House, was also hit many times, but there's only one bullet strike that survives. And it was fired roughly from about where I took this picture, went through the tap room window and hit the ceiling. And it was so important that over the years they replastered the place, but saved that section with a bullet strike in it. Really cool. That's such a great building. William Monroe ended up losing a lot that day. The British held that area for an hour or two, and they destroyed the place, took a lot of stuff, and so he had a lot of losses that day. So I like to, when I'm doing this stuff, put the petition for losses with the bullet strike info so we have all of that data. And William Monroe's father, had owned Monroe Tavern, and he died in 1747. And I love this portrait of him attributed to John Greenwood. It's in Lexington Historical Society, but the poor guy was already dead, but he got shot anyway in the arm. That's another great bullet strike, right through the cuff of his coat. And it had to have hit the wall behind, but nobody knows where the portrait was hanging in the house. So, and there's other objects. Arlington Historical Society has 3 shutters, indoor shutters that were struck that day. This one, which is in the display when you get to see it, Sarah set up, has a bullet strike that was plastered in here, and you've got the lower bullet strike, where it went in through the panel and blew out the back. There's another one that they have that has looks like the ball just kissed it, lost its velocity and dropped on the ground. But then there's another one that has a hole in it too. And you can see it's a little weird shape, but it hit high and then blew the bottom right out because the wood's a lot thinner. These are great objects because, again, they go with the first-person accounts, the primary accounts that we're reading from the British and provincials, and the lost records. My favorite daguerreotype in the whole world, the old Adams house. That is a phenomenal image of that house, and sadly, it's not here anymore. It got taken down in 1855, and as you can see, the owner of the house at the time took all the musket balls and bullet strikes he could find out of the house and sold them. So there's musket balls he was selling for $1, some for 50 cents, but he was selling all of the bullet strikes from the house as the house came down. So even people back then liked them. And here's a piece that came off of the Adams house in the Arlington Historical Society collection. It's a piece of pine, and I believe you guys have the musket ball that came in with this also. We've got to look in the collection, but there's one that's mangled that I think came out of that board. I think it was sold with it. Yeah. One thing we have to look at for the future. Got to keep this study going. And another great one, the panel from the Adams house door. And you can see where it went in. You can see the round hole when it came in and the blowout when it came out. But this one was listed as coming from a British musket. The only problem is the hole is about a .62. And it looks like it was probably an overshot from a provincial fowler across the street, or fowling piece, firing at the British column, and it just missed its mark and went through the door. It's pretty small caliber. And one of the most moving, James Hayward's Powderhorn. James Hayward was a 25-year-old school teacher from Acton, Massachusetts. He had chopped some of his toes off with an axe, cutting wood, and as such, didn't have to do militia service, but he did anyway. He came out that day. He was at the North Bridge, although he was in a militia company, so he was further behind the minute companies in the fight. But he fought all along from Merriam's Corner all the way to the Fisk House, where he ran into a British soldier. They fired at each other purportedly. He got hit. The British soldier got hit, died. He was mortally wounded, and you can see where the ball went through the horn, came out the other side. It blew the original plug out. The plug on that is a 19th century plug with a silver plaque. But it blew the ball and the shards into his body. And it was pretty horrific wound. And luckily that horn was passed down through the family and then donated to the town of Acton. So it's right now on loan to the Museum of the American Revolution in Philadelphia, but it belongs to the Acton Memorial Library. So missing objects. I just heard about another one tonight that we have to try and track down. But the cellar door for the Jason Russell house. It's listed as being shot full of balls. What we see from the data is the one ball that went through the door jamb, another one went through the door and the stair riser, but they could have changed their elevation and fired down the stairs, and there could have been shot from the men from Beverly in the basement or the cellar firing back, but we won't really know that until we can try and find the door. It was missing from around 1895, 96, I believe, is when it walked away. And I'm hoping, I want to do a social media post on this, and hopefully people will spread it so that we might be able to see if we can find the door. There were thoughts that it was possibly in Chelsea or Charlestown, one of those CH towns. And an article hasn't gone out since 1925, so it would be good to see if we can try and track this one down, because this would answer a lot of questions. And another great one found through newspaper search initially and then refound in another source, a shutter that was purportedly taken from Lexington ended up in Scotland. And it's being written about in 1844. And they're trying to find out if it did come from Lexington. And in 1846, Levi Harrington, he had been there on April 19th. He was a small kid, but he had witnessed the events. And he was remembering all this for his son, who was writing it all down. And this is in the Lexington Historical Society. It's a great thing. Some of the stuff is 19th century fanciful, but he talks about reading this newspaper article and seeing the shutter leave. And so he mentions it came from the shop, the small shop attached to Buckman's Tavern. So I don't think the first musket ball fired in the contest, I think, is a little bit off. There's no way to prove that. I would assume it's probably from the afternoon, like most of these strikes going back out of town. But it's another one. We've got feelers out in Scotland. We were supposed to present this study in Scotland at the Fields of Conflict conference, and COVID hit. So we were going to go over and see if we could try and find it, but we're going to have to wait until they reschedule it. But maybe we can track that thing down if it still survives. And another one I was just talking about with George over here was Reuben Kennison's shirt. He was killed somewhere around the Jason Russell house property, and he was brought back to Beverly, where he was from, and his wife saved his shirt, which supposedly had a bullet strike in it. It was known to be in the Beverly Historical Society until the early 20th century, when, according to them, it went out of their collection. And I remember hearing rumors about it being in Danvers, because where Reuben Kennison lived is now a part of Danvers. So, and I found it listed as being in Danvers, but Danvers doesn't seem to know anything about it. So George has been trying to track it down. I've been trying to track it down too. Hopefully between the two of us, we can get a response and get up there and find it. Because that's another one that would be really moving to have in there. I mean, the guy was killed, and he was killed right here. So what's next? We're going to shoot some stuff. I had these sections of 18th century house made up to emulate Jason Russell, and we're going to take them out and we're going to shoot them. And then we're going to use that to collect the data, and then we're going to give them to the Historical Society so that you can use them for educational purposes. Instead of having people touching the real ones, you can have real ones, but just not the historic ones. So we've got some to emulate the attic with the sheathing. We've got some with paneling. And I've also got a Powderhorn that we're going to shoot, and I've got a shutter that Concord Museum gave me. It's not a period piece. It was made in the 20th century, but it's made just like the originals, and we're going to try and shoot that too and collect some of the data from it. These are made from 18th century sheathing and studs from an 18th century house from about the same date as Jason Russell. So the wood would have had about the same time to dry as the house when it was struck. So, I posted this on social media and everybody's like, oh, it's modern wood. It's not going to do the same thing. Well, it's not modern wood. Luckily, I'd worked with some great folks in Concord, Neil and Anna Rasmussen, who bought the James Barrett house and donated it to Minuteman National Park. And they had colonial homes. They had taken down homes, and I had done their site work for them. And I went up there to get some wood. They told me they'd give it to me, and their carpenters built these for me so that we could shoot them. So that's all 18th century wood. So hopefully we're going to get the same results when we do. And the research team, most important part, obviously you guys all know Sarah, Chris Fox, Joel Dukes from Northeast Region Archaeology Program, Dr. Meg Waters, me in the background, Joe Balicki, Dr. Doug Scott, Dr. Bill Griswold from Northeast Region Archaeology, and like idiots, we're pointing at the bullet hole. Now, great group of folks. And I can't say enough about Dan Walsh, Peter Leach, GSSI, and Stephen Wilkes for donating that awesome work. Without that, we wouldn't have a lot of the data or a better way to share it without them donating their time and energy to it. It would have cost us a lot of money to have that done, and we could have raised the money for it, but hey, if we can get it donated, even better, right? So anyway, that's my talk, and if you guys have any questions, I can answer some. I know everybody doesn't want to be here too late, because what are we at for time now? 8:12? Okay, all right. Wake up, Stuart. Any questions? George?
Was there any chance of any bullet holes in the Samuel Whittemore?
There could be, but what we're trying to do is by putting this stuff out there, and I've got to do some more social media posts that can get to a larger audience, because I want people that have seen some of these things to say, hey, wait, I know where there's another one. Because we know there's more out there. We haven't been able to find anything. And a lot of it, trying to find these things, was newspaper searches and word of mouth from other people. So I'm hoping that when we get this out further, we will hear about more. And I'm hoping the Kennison shirt will come out. I'd almost like to give this in Danvers just so that they can dig and pull it out, because I'm almost positive they have it.
For the shots of the Jason Russell, were you able to locate approximately where the shooter would have been standing?
Yeah, and that's in the trajectory slide. You can see, and Sarah's got this. So I want to do one little tweak to it, but then I'll send it to Sarah, and you can do some stuff with that. And you can see with those lines where each shooter was. And it was great to be able to put the ballistics rods in with a laser, and basically it would shoot right to where the shot came from. And you could look out on Mass Ave, you could look out in the yard right outside of the kitchen, and you could see where the guy was standing when he took a shot. It was pretty incredible stuff. You can read these accounts and you can picture it in your head a little bit, but when you see the damage, when you see some of the damage, to me, it's really moving. It really helps tell the story in a better way, because as a kid, for me, I was more apt to look at the objects, handle the objects, as opposed to read. And so I think for some of us, the bullet strikes, the arms, the things that survive really give you a tangible piece of the past. And now you put it together with the manuscripts and letters and journals, and it really tells a more complete story of what happened.
The shutters that you all looked at, was that an inside shutter?
Yeah, they're indoor shutters. Yeah, yeah. No, those are all interior shutters. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the other question, when you're using ground penetrating radar,
Mhm.
what, did you find any artifacts?
So the GPR isn't going to give you necessarily a musket ball, but what it did give us, and it was great because this was done, I didn't know about the geothermal going in until after we had done this. What it also did is it showed you guys what was in the ground, because there was all sorts of stuff in the ground. Utilities, you could see where the other houses were, you could see where anything was moved or done in the ground. So it was more important for that. As far as an archaeological survey, there was one done in the 80s. It was done very well, but in today's technology, with this type of stuff on a battlefield, a metal detector, you can detect these things, you can dig them out without digging huge holes. You can dig a little hole. There's a lot of trash too. But Parker's Revenge, like I mentioned before, over a 2-year period, 3 weeks in the field, we got 32 musket balls. And if we had done shovel testing through that whole area, we had laid out a grid, we wouldn't have found one. So it's all about using the technology. And a lot of archaeologists don't like metal detectors because people loot battlefields with them. And I understand that, but it's a tool. It's like anything. They use shovels too. Do you want to hate shovels because bad people use them? When they're used properly, they're amazing instruments. And I can tell you, we have found some amazing things with them. So hopefully in the future, at Jason Russell, maybe we'll do some kind of a survey depending on what they want to do. Outside of the house area was all disturbed. You could see where the other 2 houses were that were removed. But up by the house, there's been a little disturbance, but I think there's probably still artifacts there.
Just to add to the question about where the shooters were, you remember the slides there, half or more of the shots were coming from that, but there were several from something called Jason Street. And what struck me was some of the trajectories were very high. Friends of mine I was talking today suggest there may have been snipers up in the part of the house.
There may have been, we don't know, but like the British officer mentioned, they're shooting at every window. They're shooting at any of the windows where they might have someone shooting back at them. So they're just shooting at anything. Any of the glass they're shooting at, they're trying to kill anything that might be behind it. Was there someone there? Maybe, we don't know. But that's what they seem to have been doing all the way down the road. Yeah, because there might have been humans. There might have been humans behind them. Yeah. So they're shooting a lot of times. They're mentioning they're shooting at the glass. And when you look at the losses, I know George here has gone through a lot of them, and I've gone through them. There's, like I mentioned, there's a lot of glass, a lot of damage to windows and glass from shooting at the houses.
Do you think there were a lot more shots in the house?
Yeah, I think there were more. I think there would have been more in the rear of the house, but that's all been altered. So we're never going to know. I'm pretty sure that there was some structural work done down below by the parlor, and I think there was a bullet strike mentioned in the sheathing down there, but it's gone. They replaced all that. So I wish I was around when they were doing some of that work, because I would have loved to have looked at that stuff, but I think that happened probably in the 80s, and too bad, but.
Maybe one more question, and people could come up and talk to Joel for a while after the meeting too.
I'm sorry, let me say, this may not, this is very tangential, okay? But it's about forensics, and in our own thing, and it doesn't involve guns, or shots. Is that, during our COVID time to go out and explore, my sons and I found a tree, in Mount Gilboa, conservation land. And the more we looked at it, the more we found of nails driven into it that had already been thrown over. And we took out some of these nails, and the nails were like handmade. Is that like of any relevance to anything?
That they could have been 19th. You'd have to see the nail to see if they're rosehead hand wrought or whether they're cut nails from the 19th century. I mean, a lot of times they're tacking stuff to trees. You can actually see bullet strikes in some trees. I know down in Gettysburg and some of the Civil War battlefields. Like I mentioned to, I think, Sarah earlier, Civil War battlefields, there was so much gunfire, so many people shooting, that there's so much more bullet strikes and trees that have been hit where you can see where a tree might have been hit by a cannonball and then grew around it. You can see all those weird growths on it. But I don't think, it was probably just from farming or something at some point. It's hard to say without seeing it. Yeah.
Let's give Joel another great hand. Thanks so much. Want to hope all of you have a great holiday season. And I just have one more special announcement. Most of us who hang around the Historical Society are somewhat historic ourselves, but we have somebody very young joining the Historical Society this year because Sarah is bringing a baby to us around Patriots Day. So thank you all again for coming. We really appreciate you making the effort to come and be an in-person audience. And we'll hope to see you in January for our program, which is back at the Smith Museum. So please come then.